I'm George Nation. I'm a professor of law and business at Lehigh University. I teach business law to the students in the business college, and most of my research concerns law with a focus on constitutional law, commercial law, and healthcare. The tragedy in Sandy Hook and the movie theater in Colorado, and it seems as though we have a list of these things that go on and seem to be at least more frequent. I think that there are a number of things that can be done to ameliorate that risk. We probably can never eliminate it completely, but certainly we could do a lot. Some of those things relate to what people generally refer to as gun control. That is trying to reduce the lethality of the weapons that are available to people. Who needs a gun that's capable of firing 100 shots? You don't need that to protect yourself in your home. You don't need that to go hunting. Those weapons are designed to engage multiple human targets. They're assault weapons. They're war weapons. They're designed to kill people. There is no reason, there's no legal reason, there's no logical reason, in my opinion, to have those weapons readily available to the public. They're not needed for self-protection, they're not needed for hunting, they're not needed for target practice, any sort of legitimate use. So certainly eliminating assault weapons will be a step in the right direction. Along with that, limiting the capacity of magazines. In fact, I think you could go a step further and talk about eliminating semi-automatic weapons. The assault weapons ban that was allowed to expire meant well, but didn't really accomplish its goal because it tended to eliminate weapons that appeared to be assault weapons. They were black, they'd look good in a movie, but other weapons that were functionally similar, again, able to engage multiple human targets quickly, were not eliminated by that assault weapons ban. So I think we should get serious about that. I think we should, another thing we can do is get serious about who gets the weapons. So there's no reason not to have background checks at gun sales, at private sales, at every sale of a weapon. We should have background checks. Still, in the cases of these mass shootings, we need to get serious about protecting people when they congregate in large groups. There's no reason that anyone should be able to get any weapon into a school or into a college or university or any other place where large groups congregate. You go to a courthouse, for example, go down to Easton, go into the courthouse. They do have armed guards, but this idea of putting an armed guard in every school is very limited. I don't want the bullets to start flying and then the armed guard to shoot the guy, and so we only killed a couple of kids. I don't want that gun entering that school. You go down to the courthouse, you go through a metal detector. The armed guards are there in case somebody tries to rush it, but nobody gets through there with a weapon. We could do that in our schools. We do it now in our airports. We do it in many office buildings in big cities. It's time to deploy that technology in our schools. We just had a student in Allentown leave the school building, come back in with a gun stuck in his pants. Luckily, the security guards saw him on a monitor and he was apprehended before any harm was done. There was a shooting with a shotgun in California just the other day. We need to keep these weapons out of the school. The gun advocates will say, well, gun-free zone just means the criminals can come in and shoot people and know they're not going to get shot back. That doesn't happen in our courthouses. That doesn't happen in our airplanes. It's not just say it's gun-free and hope for the best. It's say it's gun-free and enforce it, verify it at the doorway, limit access to these buildings. Well, first of all, I read the Second Amendment, unfortunately, differently than the Supreme Court reads the Second Amendment. So we should probably stick with their version. They seemed, in the Heller case and the McDonald case, to forget about the first clause. The Second Amendment says, and it's very short, it says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They got rid of those first 14 words, and they just interpreted that amendment as though it said the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's not what it says. But anyway, if we go with what they said in Heller, they said you have a right to have a weapon, a handgun, at home for self-protection. They didn't say you had a right to a semi-automatic weapon. They didn't say you had a right to a certain size magazine capacity. They simply said you have a right to a handgun at home for self-protection. We've had a recent case out of the Seventh Circuit saying that you have a right to have a loaded handgun outside of your home. Even if that were to be expanded, that doesn't mean they can't restrict your right to bring that weapon into private property or public space. That would still be fine. In fact, it was quite common. Justice Scalia gets very into the original intent and going back in time, what was going on in the late 18th century. And towns routinely restricted your ability to bring weapons beyond the city limits or to discharge a firearm. You couldn't discharge a firearm legally within Boston, and there was no exception for an intruder. So I think we've regulated guns forever in this country. We've had guns forever in this country as well, but these regulations would not violate any existing interpretation, even under the McDonald and Heller standards that the court has held down. We're not saying we're going to get rid of all weapons. We're going to get rid of certain types of weapons, and we're going to regulate where you can bring those weapons. That's fine constitutionally. If there was a Republican in the White House right now, I think the approach to gun control in light of the Sandy Hook events would be different, and I think it would be very greatly influenced by the NRA. I think that's unfortunate. I think that's because it would be very difficult for a Republican to be elected president without support of the NRA. And so I think that would color the response that you would see. It might push it more toward the, let's keep the guns out of school. But the NRA's response of putting just armed guards in, I mean, this is like, there's a town, I think in Georgia, requires you to own a gun now. And they have legislation. And there's this thought that if everybody has a gun on their hip, and the bad guy starts shooting, well, all the good guys will be able to shoot him. Who wants to be in that crossfire? I mean, that's not a safe response to this. They want me to be armed as a professor. I drop the chalk. Luckily nobody gets killed. I'll wind up dropping the gun. Who knows what's going to happen? So it's, I mean, this idea of the Wild West, is just unrealistic. I think keeping guns out of places makes a lot of sense. This will just take them out because my gun's bigger than his gun. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. But I think if we had a Republican president, we'd be more along the NRA's line.